Hey everybody, the day has finally arrived. I've gotten my hands on the all-new F-150 Lightning, and my F-150 Lightning that I pre-ordered a while ago is actually going to be built on May 9th. So hopefully soon you'll be seeing my first drive videos with my very own Lightning. In the meantime, let's talk about this one that I've been able to spend 2 days with out here near San Antonio. The first and most important thing to know about the F-150 is that it's sort of a hybrid of things. It is, I guess, technically a dedicated EV platform, but also an electrified F-150. Ford's sort of hybrid approach to designing and building the F-150 is really key to understanding this vehicle. It's what has enabled a low sticker price starting just under $40,000 for the absolute base trim. It's also what's enabled them to bring it to production a little bit more rapidly, logically, than we see in some of the other pickup trucks out there that are unibody trucks. This is still a body-on-frame truck. So if that's at all a concern to you in shopping for an electric truck, know that the Silverado truck, the Hummer truck, the Rivian truck, they're all unibody trucks, more like a Honda Ridgeline than an F-150. And even though this is not exactly an electrified F-150, it sort of still is at the same time. First, let's talk about the exterior transformation, then we're going to take a deep dive into the electrical architecture of the F-150 Lightning. The first thing to know is that this looks like an F-150 up front, but it actually shares very little in this section of the vehicle with the regular F-150. We have different sheet metal up front, a different hood, and obviously a big, huge front trunk. Now, the big, huge front trunk was made possible because the very form factor of the F-150 was designed to accommodate a 5-liter V8 under the hood. But it's not quite so simple because the frame underneath the skin is not the regular F-150 frame, and the accessories that are under there powering the air conditioning, etc., those are all very different as well. But Ford wanted to use the same cab and the same bed interior that we find in a regular F-150, and honestly, it would have looked funny if they had done anything other than have the front end shaped like a regular F-150. Ford packaged all the cooling for the EV in that very narrow space just down there at the bottom of the bumper. We still have a metal bumper up front. Going into the cargo area, you'll notice that we have even more storage under the floor, and there is a floor drain right there if you want to use that as a cooler. Also an interesting touch, we have standard a 2.4 kilowatt onboard inverter with power outlets here in the front trunk. That's the on-off button. There's also some USB chargers there. And you can power things while the vehicle is in motion. So if you want to keep a refrigerator in here or something like that, keep things cool as you're traveling to your campsite, you can do that. Or of course, it's lockable storage for tools, power tools, things like that you can also power right there. The Lightning is based around the most popular version of the F-150, so 5.5-foot bed back here, big cab up front. And the interior of the bed is identical to the regular F-150, as are the mounting points all the way around the vehicle, most especially for things like the running boards. So if you already have accessories like running boards that you prefer more than the factory running boards, or a toolbox or cargo divider, etc., that slots back here into a regular F-150, they can be transplanted right into the Lightning. As with any EV, aerodynamics are very important for range, so if you do swap out things like the wheels and tires or the running boards, etc., you can expect to see a reduction in range. How much will just depend on exactly what kind of modifications you're doing. Mirroring the design up front, we have an LED light pipe that stretches from one side to the other. You'll find the backup lights right here in the middle of the tailgate, and really the only change with the tailgate itself is this little cutout right here. And that's because if I lower the tailgate, the opening is the same size as the regular F-150, but because those backup lights were in the middle, they have backup light repeaters right over here under that covered portion for when the tailgate is open. The rest of the tailgate is the same as the regular F-150, so we have the integrated step right there, places where you can put your seat clamps or woodworking clamps, rulers integrated into the top, cup holders, pencil holders, etc. You also get the exact same spray-in or slide-in bed liners available. This one doesn't have any sort of bed liner right from the factory in this model, but you can see we have the same sort of cargo tie-downs over there on each side. In the back here, we have the same sort of inverter array that we find in the F-150 hybrid. This is rather interestingly a separate 7.2 kilowatt inverter from the one up front. So total onboard power, a little over 9.5 kilowatts, split between the 7.2 kW inverter and an onboard 2.4 kW inverter, and they're relatively independent of one another. So if one errors out or has a ground fault, the other one will continue operating. An interesting touch with the onboard inverters is that not only can you have things like this electric cooler plugged in while the vehicle is running and driving down the road, you can also have devices plugged in and drawing power while the vehicle itself is plugged in and drawing power from the EVSE. Ford has not exactly explained how this process is done, however. I expect that the onboard charger is rectifying AC, actually putting it on the DC bus, and then the inverters are then pulling it off the DC bus, so that is going to result in some onboard inefficiencies, but it does increase practicality. So if you have your camper plugged in right back here, you don't have to re-plug it I guess you could say. You can just plug the vehicle in. It will logically reduce your charging time if you're trying to charge the onboard battery and you're simultaneously trying to draw off too much power from the onboard inverter. Now let's talk about what's going on under the skin. Fortunately, Ford has provided a chassis cutaway here basically, so we can see the all-new frame for the F-150 Lightning and of course the electric motors and the battery modules. Dual motors are standard in every F-150 Lightning, and interestingly they're the same motors front and rear, and same motors whether you get the extended range version or the standard range version. Only the horsepower changes because of what the battery can deliver to the electric motors. You get 452 horsepower in the standard range model, 580 if you get the extended range model. Torque remains the same at 775 pound-feet total. Although the motors themselves are identical front and rear, there are a few mechanical changes inside the motor casing. So up front we do not get a standard locker, not one available either, but in the rear module it is standard on all trims. In the middle of everything we find your choice of two different battery packs. One is good for 98 kilowatt hours of usable capacity, the other one for 131. And as you can see, it stretches from right there in the front of the vehicle all the way back here to the rear electric motor. One of the beauties of a body-on-frame vehicle like this is that there is, as you can see, lots of room for a battery pack to exist right here in the middle of the outboard frame rails. There is some cross structure provided by these up top and then cross structure added onto below. The battery is actually isolated from the frame in kind of an interesting move. So there are 8 bolts around and then the battery can be dropped out of the vehicle with just some simple connections up front. According to Ford, the battery pack does not change when you get the max tow option in the Lightning, but what does change is the onboard chiller modules. Instead of just having one air conditioning compressor, they add a second air conditioning compressor to improve cooling for all of the various cooled modules in the system. But importantly, the Lightning does not include a heat pump, unfortunately, so in colder weather, you may experience greater range loss than in an electric vehicle with a heat pump. Moving to the back, you'll notice that the frame is considerably different versus the regular F-150, primarily because of the motor and the independent suspension that we have in this model. The independent suspension is quite logical because you would have had a lot of unsprung weight if the motor had been a solid axle motor unit. The motors are fairly heavy in their own right, and all of that would have been unsprung weight. Going to this design not only improves handling, it improves ride quality as well, and it improves packaging back here in the rear. At the very back we have what Ford says is a full-size spare tire, but definitions are a little bit sketchy because this is not actually the same size as the other tires in the vehicle, and so far none of the Lightnings on site have actually had a spare that is truly full-sized. Range will vary based on the battery and the trim that you select. The base model gives you 230 miles of range, and you'll find 230 miles of range in all the models equipped with the standard range battery. If you opt for the bigger battery pack, that's going to give you up to 320 miles of range in most trims, but in the Platinum trim, thanks to the added weight and some of the other features, that drops down to 300 miles. Charging happens behind door number 1 over here on the driver's side. There are 2 different chargers depending whether you get the standard range pack or the extended range pack. The standard range pack has a standard 11.5 kilowatt charger. The extended range model has a 19.2 kilowatt charger. So if you're interested in gaining range faster, you're going to want the extended range battery pack. Even though it's a little bit less efficient, the onboard charger means that you're going to gain range at around a rate of 30 miles an hour. Assuming, of course, you have access to an 80 amp EVSE. Now, there is one included with the purchase of every extended range F-150 Lightning. That's a really cool touch. But of course, your electrical infrastructure at home or at the office is going to need to be able to support that 80 amp charge rate. The charge port itself is basically the same one that we find in the Mach-E, and charge rates are pretty similar to the Mach-E as well. On DC fast charging, you should expect a peak rate of around 150 kilowatts. I am a little bit disappointed that Ford didn't push the envelope when it comes to DC fast charging speeds. However, the average charge speed in the Lightning is going to be faster than the Mach-E, even though the peak rate is quite similar. This battery pack is about 50% larger than the extended range pack in the Mach-E, but it's going to take about the same 41 to 43 minutes to go from 10% to 80% charge. In the auto industry, we're generally told to believe that unibody vehicles are always going to be lighter, more fuel efficient, and more pragmatic than body-on-frame vehicles like this. But the F-150 Lightning really turns that logic on its head. Compared to the only other half-ton EV truck on sale in America, the GMC Hummer, this is considerably lighter, about 3,000 pounds lighter, and it has a spare tire standard right back there under the bed. The interior is also pretty roomy, just about the same size that we find in that GMC Hummer, and it has a bigger front trunk, all while having a smaller and lighter battery pack and being considerably more fuel efficient. This may not go quite as far as the max range that you can currently get in the GMC Hummer, but this only misses it by 8 miles, and it has a battery pack that is significantly smaller. At 131 kilowatt hours versus 212 kilowatt hours in that Hummer, this battery pack is an entire Hyundai Ioniq 5 smaller. The seats and most of the interior are common with the F-150, so front seat comfort is comparable to the gasoline corollary in the lineup. In this top-end Platinum trim, we have 4-way adjustable lumbar support. You'll find 2-way in the Lariat. We also have available front seat massage, which is a handy feature, multi-way power driver's seat, 3-position memory, and the same range of motion over there for the passenger seat. We also have a memory-linked powered tilt telescopic steering column and power adjustable pedals. As you'd expect, the rear cabin is also the same as the regular F-150, so the rear seats fold up like that, so you can have extra cargo space back here. There's some cargo right there under the rear seat well, and then we have a flip-up cargo storage area that comes out of the floor. The rear seats can then fold down, if I can pull the webbing right there, right like that, and then you'll see that there is tons of legroom back here. I have about 12 inches or so. The vast majority of this interior is common with the regular F-150, so we have the same seats in the Platinum trim here. We have an adjustable shoulder section. It's kind of an interesting touch. It ratchets into place right there. Again, seat massage, ventilated seats, heated seats, lots of soft touch materials going on the front doors. We have basically the same styling over here in the dashboard with the 2 glove box motif. This one opens right like that. Then we have a somewhat small bin-style glove compartment. I was not able to fit a tablet computer inside there. In the middle of everything, we have a large 15-inch touchscreen infotainment system. This is basically borrowed out of the Mach-E. If you want to know more about this infotainment system, there should be a link in the description of this video to take you over to a detailed video. Basically, this is the same sort of setup that we find in the regular F-150 on a bigger screen with some added options like the intelligent backup power there, Pro Power onboard, that's pretty similar to the hybrid model, onboard scales, very similar to the regular models as well. One really handy touch is that with the onboard scales option, the vehicle will weigh your load and then automatically adjust your range based on what additional payload you've added to the vehicle. Over here we have the backup assist knob, power button, integrated brake controller right there, large storage area there where you can put your smartphone, Qi wireless charging mat. This does support wireless CarPlay, although you can use the USB inputs as well. We have the same sort of shifter here we find in the regular model with that storage mode right there. So if I pull my phone out of there, we can use this entire area as a workspace. That's definitely handy if you're DC fast charging. Although it is worth noting that when you're DC charging, there are games in here, but no streaming media. I do think that's a bit of a lost opportunity. If we open up the center console, we have a lot of storage going on right there with a little cargo divider, and you can put hanging files inside. Over on the driver's side, we find a standard just over 12-inch LCD instrument cluster. This is on all trims. Over here, we have the range indicator. That's going to, again, be dynamic based on what you have in the vehicle, what you're towing, etc. Power and charge gauge over here, but the style doesn't really change appreciably. If I change into sport mode right there, or off-road mode, or tow haul mode, you'll notice that the colors change, but the actual content of the display doesn't really change. Moving out from there, we have a round 4-spoke steering wheel, double spoke down there at the bottom, controls for the adaptive cruise control over here on the left side, controls that multifunction LCD cluster on the right side, but no regen paddles or anything like that on the back. In fact, over here on the shifter, there's also no B mode, no L mode. The only way you can adjust throttle lift-off regen braking is by the drive mode, but then you get the changed throttle response along with it. So you get a little bit more regen braking in sport, off-road, tow haul, etc. But the feel of the throttle is going to be a little bit different. Since a lot of you have asked about it, let's take a look around the base model interior. We have vinyl seats, more hard plastics in here, so hard plastics on the top of the door, rubbery armrest right there, and then hard plastics around the bottom of the door. The dashboard is a little bit different than the others as well, so there's actually a squishy bit right up here. We get the same sort of dual glove box arrangement that we find in the other models, and the only infotainment screen in this model is this smaller screen. However, this is still pretty big actually for a half-ton truck. This has most of the same software features, just in a smaller screen format. Below that we have physical buttons and knobs for the dual zone automatic climate control that is standard. Trailer brake control over here, this has that option with the Pro Backup Assist there. We have a large storage area there, no Qi wireless charge mat, no cover. We still have the shifter that folds into the center console, but we don't have the fold down work surface. On the driver's side, we do, however, get the same LCD cluster that we find in the other models. There's a urethane steering wheel, which definitely doesn't feel quite as premium, and we don't have radar adaptive cruise control here. The front trunk is still powered, and we have the same sort of storage compartment in here, but we don't have the powered tailgate. On the outside, the big difference you'll notice is the grille or faux grille there is different, and we don't have the LED light pipe. The Pro model is also missing the LED light pipe in the back, and we only have the backup lights over here on the side rather than that more distinctive tailgate. It appears that this is probably the same tailgate that we find in the regular F-150. Over the past few days, I have driven every different version of the Lightning, from the standard range Pro model all the way up to the extended range Platinum model, and I have to say, both battery packs and both power levels are very, very impressive. You will certainly notice the incredible amount of power we have from these electric motors and the instancy with which it is delivered. With either battery pack, you actually need to be a little bit careful with the throttle because it is so easy to roast the rear tires. Even going 35 miles an hour with this standard range pack when it was not raining like it is now, if you stab the throttle, you get a lot of rear wheel spin and the traction control has to intervene. More impressive than that is, I think, the 0 to 60 time in the base model. It is significantly faster than Ford's estimate. In my initial testing out here near San Antonio, this standard range model managed to scoot to 60 in about 4.6 to 4.7 seconds. That is significantly faster than Ford's claim, and the extended range model that gets the same amount of torque but more horsepower, that managed to do it in 4.2 to 4.3. So we're talking about really quick 0 to 60 numbers, and so much power that it actually kind of overwhelms these tires at times. You really have to be careful not to stab the throttle in corners because there is so much oomph coming from the electric motors, you're not quite sure what's going to happen. The extra weight of the centrally mounted battery pack and of course the independent rear suspension mean that this is a lot smoother over broken pavement, speed bumps, potholes, that sort of thing than the regular F-150. You will definitely notice the difference out on the road. Obviously, for my official scores like handling, braking, etc., you're gonna have to wait until I can get this back at home, but I was able to stop from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in about 128 to 129 feet depending on the model, and a little bit shorter in this standard range version, which actually has different tires. The other thing you'll definitely notice out on the road is how much lighter this really feels than the Hummer. The Hummer is about 3,000 pounds heavier than this, and the weight really shows. It takes considerably longer to stop from 60 miles an hour back to 0. This is under 130 feet, regardless of the version you get. It's actually a little bit shorter, about 125 feet in this standard range model, about 128 feet in the extended range model. General Motors has not said how much the new Silverado EV is going to weigh, but I would not be surprised if it was heavier than the Lightning. Like the regular F-150, the construction of this vehicle is very aluminum intensive. The body is practically all aluminum. Then of course we have that steel frame under there. In terms of cabin quietness, the Lightning does pretty well. In an interesting twist, the battery pack is actually isolated from the frame, which is also isolated from the body. So these three different components all have rubber mounts that isolate the one from the other. As we see in a lot of pickup trucks, the cabin is very quiet thanks to that isolation. And I would not be surprised if, thanks to the battery pack that's basically between the road and the cab where I'm sitting in, if this wasn't actually a little bit quieter than the regular F-150. When talking about range and efficiency, it's important to keep in mind climate, terrain, and the speed that you're driving. Also, of course, how much weight you have in the vehicle. Fortunately, out here in Texas, there are some 75 and even 80 mile an hour speed limit areas, so I was able to explore efficiency at a variety of different speeds. And speeds are going to be very important when we're talking about basically an electric vehicle shaped like a brick with an open bed in the back. At 77 miles an hour, I was averaging about 1.9 miles per kilowatt hour. So if you're doing those longer highway journeys, you're probably not going to get 300 miles out of this battery. It might be something more along the lines of 260 to 270 miles, depending on exactly how fast you're going. But if you keep your speeds to 65 miles an hour or under, then that fuel efficiency really bumps up to about 2.4 to 2.5 miles per kilowatt hour. And if you live out in the country where speed limits are generally going to be 55 miles an hour or so, and of course out here in Texas where the roads are pretty flat, I was averaging about 2.7 to 2.8 miles per kilowatt hour. So that would actually get you above the EPA range estimate. The key thing to remember about the advertised range on an electric vehicle is that the EPA cycle is based on 55% city, 45% highway travel, and most of those highway travel averages are at relatively lower speeds. The other thing to keep in mind when it comes to range, especially winter range, is that the F-150 Lightning does not have a heat pump. It only has a resistive element heater. Ford likely did that in order to keep parts common with the Mustang Mach-E and to help keep costs low. If you do live in a colder climate, Ford recommends that you leave the vehicle plugged in if you can. Overnight, when temperatures really drop down, there is a minimum floor where the vehicle will turn on the battery heater and keep the battery warm. That will definitely improve your range if you're the kind of person that just wants to hop in the vehicle. But if you want to really maximize your range in colder weather, then you're going to want to precondition the cabin before you depart. Not only is it going to heat the cabin, which is going to reduce the amount of electricity you have to consume in order to heat the cabin initially, it's also going to precondition the battery to heat it up. As we see in the Mach-E, Ford is pretty conservative when it comes to tuning the heating and cooling system of the battery pack. It's going to be pretty aggressive at heating the battery pack in colder weather and pretty aggressive at cooling the battery pack in hotter weather. That's one of the reasons that the tow package has the twin air conditioning compressor. All of the Lightning's electrical components are active cooled, so Ford is not simply just recirculating water through the radiator and through the battery, they're actively chilling it with those air conditioning compressors. They're also actively cooling the motors, those are oil cooled, they're cooling the inverters, the control systems, all that other stuff is being actively controlled with various different coolant loops. But again, the one thing that Ford is missing is a heat pump, and that's something that I hope that Ford includes in a later version of the Lightning because it will likely have a big impact on winter weather range. Now it's time for some bad news. If you don't already have a confirmed order or at least a reservation for the F-150 Lightning, you're not going to get one anytime soon because the demand has been overwhelming and Ford simply can't produce enough. They are, however, going to try and build 150,000 a year starting at some point in 2023. On the bright side, Ford is building all versions of the F-150 right from the very beginning. So the base Pro model, the extended range model, all the trims, XLT, Lariat, and Platinum, all of those are being built concurrently, and that production is currently ongoing as I'm filming this video. The F-150 Lariat that I have on order, that one has a production date of May 9th. So very soon I should have my hands on it, so be sure and stay tuned for that video. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, be sure and do that now. Now, the base Pro model, that's going to be available to everybody at $39,974. That's going to give you the vinyl interior, 230 miles of range, 452 horsepower, standard four-wheel drive, and interestingly, the locking rear differential. That's because Ford decided to use identical motors in every F-150 Lightning, kind of helps with their production streamlining, and of course it means that that base model is a pretty decent deal. Now, rather unfortunately, if you're not a fleet customer and you want the extended range battery, that's quite a bit more expensive. First, you have to step up into the XLT trim, which starts at $52,974. Then you have to add an option package that is nearly $20,000 to get the extended range battery. So that takes you up to $72,474. That will give you 320 miles of range. Pro, XLT, and Lariat start with the standard range battery pack. Platinum has the extended range battery pack standard. And the Platinum is going to start at $90,874. If you want the Lariat, it's kind of in between at $77,474, but there are a few options that you need to add to the Lariat if you want the max tow option. I've got to say, I am very impressed by the F-150 Lightning, and my expectations were pretty high because Ford honestly set the bar very high for themselves. They said this was going to have the capability, durability, practicality, and towing ability, etc. of a regular F-150. And that's essentially what they have given us. The range is also pretty decent at over 320 miles of rated range, and I would say definitely easily 250 miles of range in real-world driving. It all depends on exactly how fast you're going. If you're out here in Texas where speed limits are 75 or higher, then you're definitely going to notice a significant drop in range out on the highway. If you're the kind of person that wants to cross-country road trip with a 30-foot camper, the Lightning might not be the right vehicle for you because of the charging times that you'll experience. However, for the rest of us, there are definitely some distinct advantages for the F-150 Lightning over the gasoline version. Obviously, acceleration, that big cargo area up front, and the fact that this is really a no-compromises electric truck. Even in this top-end Platinum trim, the payload figure here is 1,600 pounds, and there are a reasonable number of V8 options out there that don't have this kind of payload ability. In fact, the payload rating for this top-end Platinum trim is nearly double the payload rating in the last Hummer truck that I drove because that one had the option of the spare tires in the back, and that drastically cuts down its payload ability. Of course, in this one, we have that almost full-size spare tire under there, and I'm sure a full-size spare would likely fit under there if you wanted to. Be sure and let me know what you think about the new Lightning down there in the comment section, and let me know what electric truck excites you. The F-150 Lightning, the upcoming Silverado EV, perhaps an upcoming Ram electric, the Hummer, or of course, the mid-size Rivian. Now, the interesting twist is that we don't know much about the Ram, but we do know that all of the others are going to be unibody trucks. The Silverado does have some interesting features based around that unibody design, like the midgate, which will allow you to put really long cargo items from the bed all the way into the cabin of the vehicle. But not everybody out there is overly excited about the prospect of a unibody truck. Be sure and let me know what you think about that down there as well. Of course, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Check out all the related content of the F-150 Lightning and stay tuned because my F-150 Lightning should be here within a month. I'll see all of you later.